Hello, I'm Joel Nelson, and this is the Joel vs. Arthritis podcast. So I'm absolutely honoured to be joined by Dr. Ashley Perkins from the other side of the pond for what is our Mental Health Awareness Week here over in the UK. Ashley, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. It's been a busy weekend, but yeah, it's nice to be hanging out and chatting and going through some really interesting stuff on this. So yeah, thanks ever so much for joining us, and thank you as
Absolutely.
well for probably being the first guest that's outside of that autoimmune pain sort of world that we have been covering. So I know there's lots of people that are really interested to hear your story and everything. So, but before we get on to advocacy and health in general, do you want to just tell everyone a little bit about yourself for those who don't know you?
Absolutely. So a little bit about my professional side. I'm a pharmacist. I graduated in '08 from Butler University, which is in Indianapolis, in the United States. Graduated with my doctorate of pharmacy. Started as a pharmacist, as a community pharmacist, and worked in that area for about on and off for about 10 years with like CVS, in a grocery store pharmacy, independent pharmacies, so in that realm, and then burnt out massively, and then decided I wanted to teach. So I've been teaching for the past 3-4 years now. Started at a pharmacy school and then switched over to teaching pharmacy technician students, and that's what I'm doing right now. They actually start the practicals on Monday. I'm excited. So, but I love teaching. And then on the other side of that, I also deal with mental health issues. I was diagnosed right out of college. So I've always had ADHD. Like that was never a question. Always have had ADHD. But over time, kind of started collecting. I say collecting, but started having more and more issues. Didn't really realize, because we didn't really talk about these problems as openly as we do now, but didn't realize I was having issues until my sister-in-law, after I graduated from school, she pulled me aside and said, "Hey, do you notice you do some odd behaviors that really are more extreme than normal?" And I was like, "Really?" She's an anesthesiologist, so like she's a super intelligent doctor, and I really admire and appreciate her insights. So when she said these things to me, I knew she was being sincere, and I didn't take offense to her saying these things to me. And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And she goes, "Ashley, people don't go to the grocery store in the middle of the night. That's not normal." And I'm like, "What?" Like, I know, but like not everybody avoids going to the grocery store like that, like the plague. I laugh at saying that now, but and then like I'd go to the mall like on a Wednesday afternoon when it's like really not busy because people would be at work and things, or like I'd go up to the mall, and if I saw the parking lot was packed with cars, I literally would turn around and leave. Like I wouldn't even try. Like people, that many people in one place, no go at all. So I avoided big groups of people. When my sister-in-law said, "You need to go," she's like, "I think you should see someone." So that's when I finally went, and I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and agoraphobia. And what agoraphobia is, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that broken down into the scientific definition is fear of open places. But more or less, it's, the horrible stereotype is people who are afraid to go outside, and you see in movies, they stay in their house all the time. But we can go outside, we can have normal lives. We just tend to avoid situations where we feel like we're trapped and we can't escape, or we feel like we're shut and we can't get away. For me, it's just large groups of people where I can't feel like I can get away, or like I'll find a place within the store where there's no people around and I'll just stay in that spot.
Yeah.
So as time went on, I've dealt with postpartum depression, which unfortunately led to me being inpatient after a suicide attempt. I spent 5 days in the hospital. I was diagnosed with OCD during that time. I've dealt with alcohol issues. I'm now sober. That took some time before I got there. Took a long time. I ended up getting a DUI at one point, and went through a lot of issues. A DUI didn't get me to quit drinking. I've done a lot of other things where it didn't get me to stop, but I finally decided my mental health was too important. That's what got me to stop drinking. And now I'm well over 1,200 days sober. So
that's amazing.
Almost 3.5 years now. Yeah. So I've also dealt with, let me think. So what got me started on this path is really the defining moment for me. And unfortunately was not an easy thing to go through for me, but I was a volunteer for a very long time for an organization that was extremely important to me. For 20 years, I was a volunteer for this organization, worked my way all the way up through the volunteer ranks, held so many positions, and finally got to being a leadership seminar chair, which meant on the state level, I was in charge of the entire state leadership seminar. So I was in charge of planning and all of the volunteers, making sure our seminar for that year was taken care of. And you work so hard to get to these positions, and you think, you've known all these people in this organization, and when something happens, they'll have your back.
Yeah.
A board member decided to use my mental health against me. And again, when you're in a volunteer organization, you don't quite expect somebody to do something like that.
No.
And I was shocked. And I didn't report it right away because this person had always been just one of those people that is always causing problems. And I found out, though, that they had done it to somebody else I knew. And that person never felt like anyone would believe them. So I felt at this point, we now have a repeat behavior. I need to report it. So I reported it. And needless to say, it did not go well. They didn't want to do anything. So I pushed harder because, again, I found this to be too important. And I'm not the type to just sit down and be quiet when it's something that's important. And then I had retaliation issues, and I went through 8 months of quite a bit of bullying, verbal and emotional abuse, and to the point that I was told I had to resign my position. I had to, pretty much leave. And by the time I did leave, I was told not to talk to anybody. I was told I was no longer supposed to talk about it. Just pretty much they wanted to beat me down as much as they could so that I would just go away. And when I finally left, I said I would never let a group of people ever make me feel like that ever again. And I was going to share this story as much as I could, because discrimination and stigma because of mental health should not happen. And if it's going to happen to somebody like me, who has all the privilege, education, and means as I do, it happens way too often, and it can happen too easily. And I need to spread awareness and make sure people know that this happens. So I had a mission, and here I am, and I'm going to keep sharing and making sure that we're raising awareness so that we're able to help people know how easily this can happen, and giving people the tools that even if they can't fight back, they're able to at least have the tools so they know what's happening so that they can arm themselves.
And just, well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that, because I know that stuff, you live with it every day, and it doesn't, people don't understand how it can sort of like, you carry it, don't you? And I think the other bit is I had a proper lump listening to some of that, and my palms are sweating because it's just such a familiar, all too familiar story. It happens all too much, especially, you know, I'm operating in a completely different area to yourself with the whole autoimmune thing, and that whole being made out to be the problem and cut adrift. And I similar was like you, that I had a bad experience where I sort of left a role because of my health and attendance and everything, and I said, oh, never let that happen again. And it's so easy to then fall into those same traps because you're made to feel like the bad guys so many times. I don't want to go back too far, but I literally, all my questions have gone out the window now because you've just given me a whole load of new ones. So if you don't mind.
No, I don't care. Go for it.
When you started earlier and you said about the sort of general anxiety and everything, and a friend spoke to you about that, I suppose just for the interest of people that might be watching this or listening to it back, did you know that at the time, did you sort of think might be a problem, or this might not be sort of how everybody else does things, or did it take that conversation to sort of like for you to see a different perspective on it, I suppose?
Well, my now husband, but we were just dating at the time, so because I was mostly single, I didn't really notice it. Like, it was just me, so like I just thought I did it differently, you know. When your reality isn't connected to somebody else's reality, it's like you just don't notice it. I just would go grocery shopping. I distinctly remember going to Walmart at 11:30 at night because it wasn't busy. Yeah. And that's just when I preferred to be there. Yeah. So for me, it didn't seem weird. But when she said it to me, she goes, no, not everybody does that because most people go during the day. And I'm like, okay, but I didn't know that was like something I should be concerned about. And then my husband actually said to me, you know, I thought you didn't like going out in public with me. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? And he's like, I thought it was because you didn't like to go out in public with me. And I was like, oh, no, like it has nothing to do with you. I just don't like to be out in public with lots of people. So he thought I didn't like being seen with him. And I'm like, no. And then he actually saw me have a panic attack, like in a bookstore. It was during the holidays. And I like just had a panic attack because there were way too many people. And that's when he realized, oh my gosh, she really doesn't have control over this. Yeah. And I think that's when he realized that it had nothing to do with him.
Yeah. That is a regular response though, isn't it? Like, and I think that's why people get so isolated, because people assume that it's them or it's a personal thing, and they don't realize that's just your approach. So I've really connected with this just from the last 2 years. We had the whole shielding thing here in the UK. I imagine in America they had a similar thing where the high risk people basically had to stay at home for months on end, and I've never recaptured that sort of confident person that I was. And it is, you know, that whole, if I go to the shops, I'm doing it in the first thing in the morning or at the end, or I do it with my son. I find he's a good little barrier to, you know, it's kind of like, well, I have to do it for him, but if it wasn't for him, there's no way I'd be. So today, good example, I drove around 3 playgrounds before I found one that was empty, because I promised I'd take him to the park, and like I felt like an idiot. You go into a car park, there's all these people, parents looking at you, you reverse out and you go, and it's them sort of things. But people think you're avoiding them, don't they, or that you've got a problem with them, and it isn't. This is internal battle, isn't it, that you're and like you say, for a long while you don't even realize it's there. I didn't realize after shielding I had an issue until months later, and you know, and that became clear. So thank you for, obviously that then led on to other things, and the other bit I just want to touch about, and I suppose there's a bit of a trigger warning for anyone watching or listening to this back, is around that sort of it's so common, isn't it, that you you'll try and find other ways of coping with it, whether that's alcohol or, so I talk about the noise in my head, and people sometimes confuse that with voices things. It's not. It's that whole, the weight of worry and overthinking and everything else. And yeah, I don't know, I'd like to dig into that a little bit more, because I want people to know that are watching this that is a really common thing that people turn to, isn't it? And are you okay talking about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant.
Oh, absolutely.
So was that was that by design, or as like in my experience, it just kind of happen as a way of trying to find an escape, I guess?
Well, I mean, in college, we all did it. I mean, pharmacy school is by far one of the toughest things I've ever done. It was hard. It was rough. And I mean, luckily I had all of my friends, but we all drank too much. We all did. I mean, most of us will sit there and say we all drank too much. But when you're in college, you just don't think about it, because you're all doing it together. But for me, mine didn't end in college. Mine continued. And it was an unhealthy coping mechanism. It was my way of, when I got home from, whether it was work or whatever, but if it was a stressful day, I drank. If I was, stressed about something else, whatever, if I wanted to shut all of that stuff off in my head, drank. Because then it shut everything off. I didn't have to listen to it. I didn't have to feel it. I didn't have to deal with it. Numb it all. Yeah. And that's exactly what I did. And it would get destructive. And then I'd notice it would get destructive. So I'd stop doing it for a while. And I'd be fine. Like I wouldn't drink for a while. And then I'd be like, okay, now I'm okay. So I can have one. And then I'd end up drinking more, and then it'd start getting unhealthy again. And then I'd start cycling again. And then I'd notice it was getting to be a problem again. So then I'd stop, and I just kept doing this cycle. And I do this cycle, and I do this cycle, and I do this cycle. And again, I ended up with a DUI in 2013. I was out. My husband was coming home from a work trip. I was at a restaurant. It was a restaurant we went to all the time. And one of the people that worked there was actually going to drive me home. And he went to like get changed real quick. And when he came back, I was gone. I just decided, I guess, to go. And because I don't remember. And so I drove and ended up hitting a retaining wall. Pulled my right front wheel off its axle, continued to drive while dragging my tire, and then got myself home, and I was almost to my door when the police got there. And
I suppose it was, but you mentioned earlier that didn't stop you. So I suppose because it's not the source of the problem, is it? It's almost secondary to it's a coping thing or subsequent of that underlying health issue. And I think people miss that sometimes, don't they? They think, oh, that wouldn't that shock you into, because that's not the problem.
Yeah, I never drank and drove again. Yeah. So that was enough for me to never do that again. If I was going to be, if I knew I was driving that night, I would drink at dinner. I never drank and drove ever again. Like I learned my lesson with that one. I was not, because again, I was lucky I didn't lose my license to practice to do pharmacy. Like I was very lucky because I was scared that I was going to lose my license. So I was very lucky I didn't lose my license in any of the states that I was licensed, because at the time I was licensed in 2 states in the US. So I was very lucky. So I wasn't tempting anything at that point. So I wasn't doing it again. But yeah, it didn't get me to stop drinking. And it wasn't until 2019, January of 2019. So 2013 to 2019. So 6 years later is when I finally quit drinking.
Thank you for sharing that. Like I say,
Absolutely.
it feels like a privilege to hear that so candidly and everything. So yeah, thank you on behalf of everyone listening and watching. And you sort of you spoke about that experience going through, and then it was sort of like what happened in your career and everything, that it sounded like, correct me if I'm wrong, that was kind of like that turning point of, I don't want anyone to go through that again. So how did you make that change? Like, was it a conscious thing? Was it just out of circumstance? Or, what got you to sort of find your voice, I guess?
Well, once that volunteer organization had just beat me down so much, first of all, it's embarrassing to admit, as a strong professional, someone who has worked in her career, because my volunteer work and my career work were very different.
Mm-hmm.
So in my career, a strong career professional woman, and then in my volunteer work, I had allowed a group of individuals to beat me down so bad, to the point that, but at this point, it was July of 2019, and I had lost 15 pounds because my anxiety was so bad. I couldn't eat. I was barely, my husband was keeping me alive practically at this point. I was barely functioning. Thank goodness for my therapist too, and my psychiatrist. I had a support system like you couldn't imagine. And I'm very fortunate for that support system, because they were keeping me alive. And if it had not been for them, but I had let a group of people absolutely demolish me. And it's embarrassing to admit that. But when I finally realized what I had allowed to happen, I was like, no, this has to stop. And two, now I'm going to use this and I'm going to do something. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I have to do something, because this can't happen to other people. I was like, I can't let other people go through this, because what I just have gone through is horrible. And I have PTSD from it, and I'm still going through it, and I'm still dealing with it. I'm doing a lot better than I was when I first, started dealing with it. But, I refuse to let other people go through this, because I wouldn't even wish this on the people who did this to me. And that's saying something. So I just knew I had to do something. And so I just started to do something.
Yeah. It's crazy how much that people have that sort of that flashpoint moment. So like for me, there was a treatment change that was beyond my control, and I was exactly the same. I was like, people cannot go through what I did, and nobody's talking about this. And I think I would have just gone down a very dark path if I didn't find an outlet, and advocacy sort of became that outlet. But very similar to you, I had no idea what I was going to do. I just knew I had to do. So mine started with like writing, because it was kind of all I felt I could do, and then it kind of went off on this tangent. But yeah, I find that really fascinating, and I think that doesn't seem to get talked about enough, does it? That you can turn those negative situations into good. So do you want to talk us a little bit? I don't mind which order you want to do it in, but either like your advocacy itself or the finding of sort of We Matter Too. I'd like to explore that, but I don't know the timeline. So do you want to maybe pick that up in whatever order you fancy?
Yeah, I knew I had a unique platform being a pharmacist, because, as pharmacists and as medical providers, we're not told directly, but we're indirectly told we really shouldn't share as openly as I share. I openly share about my DUI. I openly share about a lot of situations that I've gone through that you wouldn't normally hear from a medical provider. And, I chose to go ahead and just open my life into a pretty open book, to show that stigma's bullshit, pardon my language, but that it is. Because I've been able to achieve everything people that don't deal with these situations, I've been able to achieve just as much as they have while dealing with all of these things. And I thought the way to do that was to just show that I've been through all this stuff and I've done all this stuff, and look, guess what, I can do it. And I figured if we're going to fight stigma, the time is now for us to finally share our stories out loud and actually show that stigma isn't true.
Yeah.
And what better way to do that than as a pharmacist? And so my idea for We Matter Too came from the book that I wrote when I was really pissed off. But the book's coming, it's slowly coming, but we actually have a cover and I have a cover and all that stuff. So we're getting there. But We Matter Too came from the title I Matter Too, which is the title of my book. But my friend John, who was always very close to me, he was my assistant when I was the leadership seminar chair, but he has always been a loyal friend. But when I got the idea for We Matter Too, I called him and I said, you know, the way to end stigma is to openly share stories and show people that we can live our lives and do it by openly sharing our stories. He's like, well, what if we start a nonprofit that does that? And he's like, I like that idea. So we did. We didn't plan to start it the month before the pandemic, but we did.
There seems to be a lot of people that had that sort of perfect time and sort of thing.
We literally started the paperwork like the last week of February 2020 with a donation from, actually, my grandmother passed away January 30th of 2020. Thank goodness, because I'm glad she didn't have to go through all this. But my parents gave us the donation to do all the paperwork so that we didn't have to worry about it. And so we did it. We were like, let's just do this. So we started the paperwork, and we had our first board meeting January 2021. And then we were able to get our nonprofit status. But really what we do is I do the peer support stuff on Twitter. And then we amplify stories on Instagram and Twitter, our website. We share people's books, blogs. You know, we're all about sharing other people's stories, because what I didn't like is how you have to be mostly well and get a large following on a social media platform in order to get your story out there.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to work so hard to get your story out there, as far as I'm concerned, because again, the title and the name of our organization is We Matter Too. All of our stories matter, all of them.
Yeah.
And so that's why we amplify stories, all of them. It doesn't matter. We want everybody's story to get out there. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, that really is like the example I can relate to that, in that I've been doing this for 3 or 4 years now, and it is only now this year that I'm getting the opportunity to speak to medical professionals, and then I'm doing this as almost like a second job, but it's still taken that long to get in the right rooms with people who can actually decision makers to make a difference. So it's just a shame that there's all these people out there that have got much more powerful stories than me, that are far more better at telling them, but they haven't got the time, the energy, or they're in that dark place in their journey that I was, or maybe yourself was, and sharing it just seems like Everest. You're never going to do it. So you should be really proud of what you're creating. And do you want to tell people, I'll put this obviously all in the show notes on the podcast, but do you want to tell people where they can find We Matter Too, and if they want to get involved or help, how they could maybe do that?
Yeah, so our website is wematter2.org. That's our website. And then you can always find me on Twitter. I'm there like all the time. It's at Because I Matter. That's me. I'm on Twitter like all the time. And then all of our social media is at We Matter 2 @WeMatter2INC. So if you do @WeMatter2INC on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, you'll find us. It's all the same. So we are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And then we're also, our website, and our social media is taken care of by Ariana and Sarah. They are two of our board members. They take care of all of our social media stuff. So they usually get back pretty quick with people. So, and then Ariana takes care of all of our website stuff. So.
And yet you should be super proud of that, because it is like it's leave, and you can see where you've been, put it that way. And at the end of the day, with advocacy, that's all I think you can ask for, isn't it?
John and I sit there, we still talk about it, because John and I talk at least once a week, and we didn't expect it to go as quickly as it did. And I never expected to get to where I was personally as quickly as I did. But like I said, when I was on a mission, and that day when I can see it even in my mind right now as I'm talking about it, but I was on a mission, and I was not going to stop, and I'm not going to either, because and the organization, they're an international organization. They don't scare me. But I'm going to keep telling it, because again, I want people to know it happens. And unfortunately, I can't tell you how many people I've helped through similar situations or other situations. And because I share this story, they are noticing the stigma. They're noticing it's happening. And that's why I do it. And that's why I share it, because they're like, oh my gosh, I saw it, or it's happening, or and I'm like, I'm sorry, what can I do to help?
And you're probably not giving yourself enough credit in what you've achieved as an individual, in terms like your WEGO award, and I think you've done TEDx speaking as well, haven't you? And so to do it in such a short, and from the place you came as well, I think it's just phenomenal. And also probably says a lot for the support and care team and everything you've had around you on that journey, I imagine.
And that's the thing, like John, my co-founder, he's always telling me to stop, but I'm like, I'll keep doing it. But if I didn't have him next to my side most of the time, I don't know where I'd be. And then of course my husband and my family, like I have one of the best. I am very fortunate. I have a wonderful support system, because they're always there by my side and, supporting me. And again, through that year that I went through all that stuff, again, I couldn't have done it without them. And I think that's another really important thing for a lot of people with mental health issues, is that support systems are so important. And it is truly important to have them, even if it's only one or two people, because they're so important for us, because we need those people so we can lean on them when we need them the most, especially when we're struggling.
Yeah. And I don't know what it's like in your part of the world, but here in the UK, as well as maintaining those support systems. So like getting access to a sort of course of CBT or wellbeing therapies or whatever isn't that difficult, but it's a very time limited thing, and then you're back out into the world, and you have to keep adding these sort of tools to your toolbox, but getting that continued support is difficult. And I think one of the things I learned is that self-management bit, and identifying when you're having your wobbles, or so for me is that low mood thing. So I'll stop doing the things I love, and my advocacy, you'll really notice it. So if I'm having a really bad week, I don't do any Instagram posts, or I cancel that stream, but now I've learned to recognize that stuff. So I suppose, what would your advice be? And I know everyone's journey is different and there's an individual thing, but for those people that, in terms from like a self-management point of view, what sort of advice would you give for that, for those that might be struggling?
Yeah, I just recently, because I've just recently going through burnout myself, after teaching for 8 straight months. It's just been one of those things, and I know I started to notice it myself. And when you have to maintain in order until you can get to a break where you have a longer period of rest, if you can recognize, like you were saying, if you can recognize that it's coming before you crash and burn, that's better, because you want to try to not crash and burn, because it's going to be worse. So doing those, so what I was doing is, because of course I can't cancel my classes, I have to keep teaching. So I have to maintain until I could get to the last day of class. So on the weekends, I was making sure I wasn't working and I was enjoying like my family time, or making sure I was getting extra rest, or I love to knit. So I was doing extra, like knitting, or I was making sure I added some extra self-care things. So whatever self-care things you enjoy doing, do extra, to make sure you're maintaining through the week, or whatever you have to do that you can't just not do because you have to do it, to maintain until you can get to whatever last day there is. And I noticed as I was getting closer and closer to that last day, the little bursts of rest were not maintaining me through the week as much. But those rests were at least getting me through the weeks, so that I could at least get to my last day. And like, I was starting to, like, normally I would eat my dinner in the classroom with the students. Instead, I was going and eating my dinner outside, to switch it up, because then I was getting outside of the classroom, give myself a little extra break, be outside in nature, you know, it was sunny, just to give me a little extra pick me up. Again, just something extra. So finding different things to kind of give you that extra like oomph to get you through, because I was struggling hard. And then my last day was the 11th, and these past few days have been nice because I've been able to rest. And today I finally did laundry, and I could tell I'm finally getting that energy back. So it's starting to get better.
And then you have that whole battle of pacing and boom and bust and trying not to do too much on the good days.
Right.
And, it's a common theme that comes up in our autoimmune world anyway. But you're right, because I think a lot of people listening to this will probably relate to that whole, you're sort of, any downtime you get is almost like a quick battery recharge to do the day job or whatever it is. And it's not a fun, healthy way to live. You know, I would often find by the Friday night I was in such screaming pain from a physical, you know, condition, that my Saturday, Sunday was spent in bed. And then you go into work on Monday and everyone's like, oh, did you have a nice weekend? Was it restful? Did you go anywhere? And no, I literally was in agony getting on top of that, ready for Monday. And people don't realize how different that life is compared to the normal, whatever is normal, but you know what I mean.
Right.
So that's just spot on. And it's funny, those similarities, doesn't matter what the condition, that lifestyle seems to be the same. If you, I suppose, had to say, we've talked about the value of people sharing their stories and everything else, and if people are feeling, and I know it is a jump for a lot of people, it certainly felt like a jump for me, and it was only similar to yourself when I found the release it gave me sharing my story, that it kind of become a bit of a, I guess you swap one addiction for another almost, but it's a healthy one. What would you say to sort of somebody thinking about sharing their story, that, you know, either how to start or that might encourage them to do that?
Just do it. I mean, honestly, like, find a place and do it. Like, you know, when because you're on Facebook, and Facebook is like horrible recently, but that's a whole nother thing. But you know, I realized these are all people I know, and if I want to get my story and the information I have out there, I've got to go someplace else where people don't know me. So I went to Twitter, and I knew nothing about Twitter. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. but I'm just going to create a different account and I'm just going to go out here and do something and just go with it. So June of 2020 is actually when I joined Twitter with the account I have now. And I mean, I have an old account that I used to use, but you know, it's ancient. And I call it my antique account. And so I joined June of 2020 and I just started tweeting mental health stuff. And now, not even 2 years later, the account is what it is. And I mean, we have this wonderful mental health community. I gotta say, the mental health community on Twitter is just by far one of the most accepting and supportive communities I've been part of. And they've even helped me through some pretty rough stuff. So, you know, and I just started doing and sharing and creating opportunities for myself that I didn't even realize were there. And I didn't know what I don't know what I'm doing half the time. I fly by the seat of my pants 95% of the time. People ask me, do you schedule your treat? Nope. I don't schedule anything. I just am doing whatever half the time. And I don't even know half the time what I'm going to do. And I just go with it because that's what I found works. If I just go with it. And if people want to share their stories, share them, because it's going to make you feel better and it's going to help you heal. Because honestly, I think and when I started writing my book that I'm working on right now, writing the book honestly helped a lot.
Yeah,
it helped
writing
a lot.
is massively undervalued. So yeah, it's my doctor that told me to do it. They said you just need to. And I think I made the mistake. If I'd done a post on Facebook, I'd done a post on Facebook, and mine has always been locked down. I used to work in schools and academies, and it was just a dangerous place to have a public profile. And it was the first ever post that I did where I changed the privacy to public, and it just went mad. I had like 200-300 shares and more shares than I had friends on Facebook, and it terrified me, and it literally almost made me just scurry away back into a hole. And then so then I started doing the whole gel versus arthritis and blogging, and I didn't tell anyone about it for months because nobody was ever going to know, because I hadn't told anyone I had this condition for most of my life. And so I think, yeah, anyone listening to this or watching now, you can be anonymous on the internet. Use that to your advantage if that helps you take that first step, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's plenty of people that I've talked to on Twitter. I have no clue who they are. I mean, and that's fine. I mean, with mental health, people are still terrified to share, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them one bit. I mean, look what happened to me. I mean, seriously, like, I don't blame people. And when people ask me my honest opinion about if they should share at work, I tell them, do you feel safe? And if they stop and they're not sure if they are safe to say something at work, I tell them not to share. I'm like, because guess what? If once the cat's out of the bag, they can use it against you.
Yeah.
And look what happened to me. I am a prime example of what can happen. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's safe to share, because it's not.
Yep. And that spat, I think it's even worse for mental health and issues. But even like the first job I lost because of my arthritis and attendance and everything, I was off for low mood. It wasn't actually pain or anything that had me off. It was mental health issues, the depression of living with this long-term thing. And part of the makeup behind me getting served my notice was because I had a tattoo and I put it on Facebook without knowing the context that my therapist had told me do something for myself, and family had paid for it for my birthday, and it was like this release thing, and it was a tattoo for my dead grandparents, and that was used as a and unfortunately so there's only two of us on this call and we've both had those experiences. And so I think, yeah, if you want to share your stories, guys, when Ashley says, do you feel safe, I don't think you ever really know until you get to a subject like that, because I certainly felt very safe in that role, and I loved the people I worked with, and I miss them all. I worked there for nearly a decade, and I was cut adrift in a heartbeat just because I'd gone from fit and healthy, well managed, to flare and Joel that nobody recognized, and then it caused the mental health issues. So yeah, it's definitely worth testing the water behind a sort of veil of privacy. Even if you just do it as a release, even like say blogging's a good one. Pick a random name and just blog to the world, and they never need to know.
Exactly. And people, and I tell people all the time, I'm like, do you want to work in a place that's not going to support your mental health? And if their answer is no, then I'm like, then them knowing is not always a bad thing either. So you have to pick and choose what you want and then decide accordingly. If you don't want to work in a place that's going to support your mental health, then not being there is going to be better for you anyway. So you just have to pick and choose your risk assessment before you go into everything.
And a lot of anyone who's had sort of mental health therapies and things, especially talking therapies, a lot of it is around perspective shift and things like that, isn't it? And seeing things from different angles. And I think, it's very easy for your health and for those around you to get you into that negative space, isn't it? That you're the problem, that you're being like if I had £1 for every time somebody used my mental health mood to say you're being irrational or you're just miserable against me, and I've only sort of like, mine is sort of that. I always say that mine goes hand in hand with my physical condition because it causes a low mood, depression, and on occasion sort of suicidal thoughts and things like that. But the minute you share that, even now with people that know you so well, if they don't like what you're saying in any conversation, can even be a subject about sport, it'll be like, oh, well, that's just you're being irrational, and it makes your blood boil, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. The second that, even now, I've not had anything to do with this organization since August of 2019. And anytime I spout off about them, because again, my therapist is like, you're allowed to be angry for what they did. We very much validate my anger because the organization never did. So we validate my anger. That's one thing that my therapist does. And so when I get angry, I'm allowed to be angry, rightfully so. I love when I hear back from people, they're worried about your mental health. Of course they are. I'm angry.
or they're only worried about your mental health when it's like in a work setting. I find when you're perceived to be the problem, they weren't worried about your mental health when you were building up to burnout and all the signs were there, and it starts with the odd day absence, or you might be a little bit flustered, or maybe you work with people long enough, how they handle situations, and the flags are always there. Like, as my job as a manager is to recognize which in a remote world has been impossible, it's to recognize when that person who's always on time comes in late, or that person who's normally really well dressed isn't, looking a bit disheveled or something. And so that frustrates me as well, that line, because we're worried about your mental health. Well, you're only worried about it when it got to a point that it was a problem for you. You weren't worried about it when I kept telling you I was struggling.
Right? Yeah. Like when I was actually telling you.
Yeah.
But or overtly telling you were hurting me.
Yeah.
But now when I'm angry at you, now it's a problem.
Yeah, because I challenged or because I spoke up. And
Exactly.
Yeah. I get a lot of people ask me about like whistleblower processes and things like that. So I just don't trust that. I know there are places out there that I'm sure are brilliant, but I can't, if you're in a place where you don't feel supported and you feel like your health is being used against you a little bit, I don't know, my experience, and it is real experience, is that what's somebody with a dedicated title in the same organization, the same culture, going to do any differently? You're jumping into the void, aren't you, a little bit?
So HR, as I have learned, is not there for you. They're there for the company. So you don't go to HR. I have learned the hard way that the people that are supposed to be there to protect you are not there to protect you. They're there to protect the organization. So we didn't really, because we were a volunteer organization, which muddied everything.
Yeah.
They were there. So the lawyers that the organization had were really there only to protect the organization from any issues, not to protect me. So I found out the hard way. And I have also learned that HR, when it comes to it, HR is only worried about them and the company. So when it comes down to it, they'll throw you under the bus to protect the company and themselves. So when I get asked these questions about like legal stuff or whatever, you need to create a paper trail. Never, ever, like everything needs to be written down. Keep them in your email as much as possible. Don't ever let them get you on the phone, because as soon as they take you out of your email onto the phone, then they can say they didn't say something, or you said something that you didn't say. So try to keep them in your emails. They would try to get me out of my emails onto the phone all the time. And I was like, I know what you people are doing. No. Email, no phone calls. Keep them so you have documentation of what's happening, so that you have it all. And that if you have to have a phone call, what you do is as soon as the phone call is done, you document everything, put everybody on an email, and then you send it out.
Yeah.
And then you make sure you can exactly record everything, if you need a phone, you can have a recording, say, may I record this, record it. Because I have every text message, I have every email, I do have a recording of a phone call. I have everything.
Yeah.
And I still have it to this day. So if for some reason they do want to come at me, I have it.
Yeah. And it's sad, but the other thing I've found is even this, when you've got really good people in those roles, bad culture trumps everything. So you could have the most kind, honest, good intentioned people in those roles, but if they are hitting a ceiling because of a culture, then there is no changing that. And unfortunately, like you said about the whole paper trail thing, I've learned that the hard way. The amount of times in the course of my career when I've been shouted and screamed at and nobody's seen it, and I should have just said go away. But I think that the built-in, I think probably what makes me so good at being an advocate, that honesty, trying to help people please a kind of element, is what makes me so vulnerable with my conditions in the workplace, unfortunately, because you try to help and then it ends up you end up giving somebody a platform to, and the thing is, when your confidence is here because of your ongoing health issues and theirs is there, it's very difficult to take a strong position in those conversations. So I'm just sorry it's such a common, for anyone else out there listening to this that's had that experience, know that you're not alone. And again, it is the reason why sharing these experiences is important, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So those people know that.
Absolutely.
I'm really conscious of your time, because I think we could probably talk for hours and I promise you'd only be sort of 45 minutes.
Oh, it's all right. No worries.
Is there, what, I guess there's a couple of things I'm interested in. What's the future for you? Like, obviously you've achieved so much in such a short space of time, and you've come so far, both in terms of management, your health and your advocacy. I suppose, what's the future for Dr. Ashley Perkins, if you're on an advocacy point of view?
Well, I'm hoping that the book will come out this summer. I'm hoping.
Can't wait to read.
We're hoping. I'm working on it. My peer readers are currently reading it right now. My editor's helping me work on it. So we are getting closer to a finished product. So to let everyone know, it's pretty much my story of dealing with a lot of what I've gone through in my life and overcome. It talks about all of my diagnoses. As I kind of like was diagnosed with them, and I include research. So I did the research. I talk about stigma. I talk about, actually I did research into bullying, because unfortunately I've dealt with that. And of course I talk about the discrimination. I put research in about that. And I talk about, unfortunately, microaggressions and how it relates to stigma in that sense. And of course, I talked about my DUI. And I really expand a lot. So a lot of the stories people have heard, I really expand upon them and all the other things that I've gone through, and I just expand upon them, and it's all in this book.
I can't wait to read. I saw it was at the cover. I think you gave a sort of sneak peek of it. That looks amazing. And
I'm so excited.
Yeah, and there needs to be more books of these journeys, because I think there's one thing, sort of sharing the story is like, just do it if you can and you feel comfortable and everything else. But I think for the journey that you've gone through, it's just, well, I was absolutely hooked just listening to your introduction tonight. So I can't wait to read it in depth, and I'm sure plenty of the people watching this and listening to this back will feel the same. So I will just remind you guys, I'll put all of links to Ashley's socials and everything where you can find her work in the show notes for the podcast when it comes out, and on the video when it goes up as well of this recording. So check it out. But I will let you go now. Thank you ever so much for spending your time with us. It's been absolute pleasure and massively insightful. And until next time, thank you, Ashley. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Absolutely.
This podcast was recorded on the Joel vs. Arthritis Twitch channel. If you would like to watch the podcast recorded live, be a part of the audience, ask questions, or generally just get involved more, then please head over to twitch.tv/Joel vs. Arthritis. You can also find recordings of the podcasts in video form on our YouTube channel. Again, search Joel vs. Arthritis. Thank you very much for listening.